Ruchem Aboim B'Shem Hashem B'Shem Egan Shir Torah. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov that's Mishlita on Issa Schita V'Kibus V'Godim V'Kelim Synthetic Materials and Hilchos Shabbos. The great Hilchos sponsoring a shir. Call Egan Shir Torah 718-851-8651 or email ist@shivanet.com.
Someone had a polyester suit. It was a 100% polyester suit, and he was told you're allowed to clean it on Shabbos. And it was surprising to him and certainly to me, and I decided I have to look into the sugya. Today we have a metzias that many clothing, jackets, suits, talis cotton, many other garments are 100% polyester, which as we'll soon see is a synthetic, it's an artificial material. And you want to know about the issa of kibus, of laundering. Then we heard a different shaila about someone bought a special Shabbos toothbrush. What is that? So it's interesting, it's a good question, and we'll discuss that together with the Shabbos sponge. Is there any heta of using a sponge, which is typically also the fact that it's a Shabbos sponge, it's made differently. So if you notice, as we'll see, there are literally tens of different questions regarding synthetic material. But if you notice, we really touched upon two different malachas. We're talking to touch upon today Siman Shin Beis, which is the issa of kibus, of laundering, one halamates malachas. And as far as a sponge and a toothbrush, that's the issa of schita. So you get more for your money today. It's two for the price of one. It's going to be two malachas, but they really want you to understand a little bit about this new concept that is really much more prevalent than we realize, and that is the issa of schita and libun with synthetic material. So let me just give you a little of the background. Synthetic basically means that it's an artificially produced material that's chemically synthesized. But to make a long story short, it's all comes from plastic. Plastic is a basically new innovation, and it has incredible uses. It has many different names, and each product has almost its own name. Terolin sounds very chashuv, right? Terolin is a plastic that's supposed to simulate silk. You have a terolin tie, you feel chashuv. But the right plastic tie, you're not going to wear it, right? Now, acrylic is the word used for wool. I saw an acrylic sweater, you feel very chashuv. You have acrylic, you're not just wool. Acrylic, okay, good. But acrylic is plastic. But it's made as a wool substitute. And then there's nylon, there's rayon, and there's vinyl. Vinyl could be on a floor, could be in a car. And again, in items, it's unbelievable. And toys, on the floors, in furniture, shoes could be plastic, sweaters, talis cotton, raincoats, the list goes on and on and on. But the main point is that it's really all comes from a plastic that does not grow, it's man-made. What's the nafkamina? We'll soon see. Don't forget, today we're talking about on Shabbos, but the same halachos apply to Yomtov. Because some halachos are mutter on Yomtov, oichel nefesh, but libun or schita is also on Yomtov like Shabbos, so it's 52 days a year plus 13 days of Yomtov. Obviously, I should just mention, you should realize how important this is. The halachos of plastic is also very much negeya regarding kashering, if you could kasher plastic, regarding taras hamishpacha, the plastic, what is the status of plastic. So basically, it has a lot of ramifications, but today we're going to focus on Shabbos, which includes two, which is really one, libun and the issa of schita. So we have to know one thing. To take a regular beged, a regular means a material that grows, a woolen jacket, a woolen talis cotton beged, and it has a stain. To add water is a Gemara in Zvachim that Tzadik Dalet on Beis, the Machab and Shin Beis, Siv Tes says it clearly. Merely adding water without scrubbing it is a malacha deraisa of libun. What's libun about? I didn't scrub it. So the famous word shriyasai, when you soak with water, you either pour water on it or put it in water. Zui kibusai. The hezbah is very simple. A stain gets into a garment, so it gets embedded in the garment. When you put it in water, water has the ability to loosen and dislodge the stain. So you don't have to rub. Of course, rubbing does a better job, but merely putting it in water or putting water onto it loosens the stain and eventually comes out. And that's a cloud that we know that the issa of kibbutz is lav davka, it's perfectly clean. The issa of kibbutz, I think, is correctly defined as a maisa kibbutz. So shriyasai zehu kibbusai. It gets into the fabric and it starts to loosen the stain. The next possible issa of libun is what's called shifshav. After it's wet, you rub it. Either rub it one on one side or the other, or you rub it with your hands or with a brush. That's called shifshav, and that independently is a malacha deraisa. The third possibility is after it was wet and it's soaked, if you wring it out, you squeeze it out, out comes dirty water. Why is it dirty? Very simple. Because the water already connected with the dirt, squeezing it out, you're extracting the dirt. So either one is a malacha deraisa, and I once pointed this out, that it's amazing that the heintige washing machines follow this pattern in the way it's designed. First, the washing machine fills up with water, that's the soak cycle. Then it agitates it, that's the shifshav, and then it wrings it out. When it spin cycle, it's not just to get rid of the water, to make it easy to dry, it's also part of the libun process. Wonderful. Now we know that adding water to a material, I say material, I mean any of the Rebbeinu Shlomo's material that grows, is malacha deraisa shriyasai zehu kibusai. Now I'll ask you a simple question. Let's say you have a stain on your countertop. The soda spilled and now it's sticky, you want to wash it off. Is that mutter on Shabbos? Or, better yet, how about you want to wash plates on Shabbos? You're allowed to wash Friday night for the Shabbos Suda. Why is that also al shriyasai zehu kibusai? Doesn't make sense. But why taka is it mutter? The teretz is obvious. As we said earlier, when you have a garment, so the stain goes into the actual fabric, it gets embedded within, and that's a stain. That has to be extracted. But let's say a person, like we say, he hits the pillow, hits the sack, actually in English, he hits the pillow, and the pillow bursts, and he's full of feathers. Now he looks pretty, funny. Can he clean himself from all the feathers? Yes. Why isn't it kibbutz all over his jacket? Sounds funny, but why isn't it kibbutz? So this is the Ramah in Shin Bei Sif Aleph. The Ramah says that you're allowed to take feathers off your jacket. Why isn't it kibbutz? Says the Mishnah Berurah, because it's not kibbutz, because it's not dirty. The feathers are not in the fabric itself. The feathers are on the surface. Taking dirt that's not embedded in the garment itself is not an issa of kibbutz. So if it's not in the garment, there's no issa. So removing feathers is a good example that the issa begins when it's in the actual material itself. So now the shaila is very simple. We see that shriyasai kibusai by a beged. We see by an item that by the dirt that's not embedded in the surface, there's no issa. Now the question is, can I rub a plastic tablecloth? You see, in the olden days there was tablecloth, which means cloth. Obviously, to put water on a tablecloth, that's cloth, is malacha deraisa, shriyasai zehu kibusai. But now the shaila is, if I have what people use, I wouldn't say it's a hard plastic, but it's not as flimsy as a disposable tablecloth. People cut it to size, they use it, they fold it after Shabbos, use it from Shabbos to Shabbos. So it's pliable, but it's still plastic. Can I rub that plastic tablecloth to get out a stain? There's a nasty stain, the soda spilled and it's set in and it's sticky. Can I rub a plastic tablecloth to get out the stain? So now we're more intelligent to answer the question. Is it like material shriyasai zehu kibusai, or is it like a countertop or plates that there's no issa? So for this we have a Gemara, and we've said this many times. I'll say it again. You see the nitzchias, the sheinkeit, the eternal Torah. There's an answer to every shayla. Every shayla is an answer. You have to find it. We're going to see today. We're going to talk today. Will be a little of a kachim sugya because the Gemara in Zvachim happens to be. But the Gemara says the following: that Trios, the Gemara that says Trios Kibusi is in Zvachim Sadik Dalad Amud Beis. The same Gemara discusses how about if you have a leather glove, nashim with gloves on top. Let's say a woman has a leather glove that has a stain in it, or you have a stain on your leather couch, real leather or leather belt. Can I put water on a stain on a leather garment? So the Gemara says that leather is somewhere in between. Leather is not absorbent as regular wool material. But when the dirt gets in, it gets in, and you have to rub to get it out. When you have a stain in a leather garment, if it's embedded within, it's not going to come out by shriya. You're going to have to put water on it and rub it. Of course, if it's on the surface, it comes right off. But the Gemara is saying that leather's in between. It's not like material, because we do not say Shriyas is El Kibusay. Shriyas is not asa. But then again, it's not like wood or glass or metal that you could rub on Heinz Morgan. There's no issa. It's not as hard as glass, wood, or metal. If you rub, if you're mishavshev, that's the issa of libun. In fact, the halacha feels that rubbing leather, which gets out the stain, is a malacha deraisa. True, it's harder to do, but once you do it right, that's the regular issa of kibus. So I'll read the lashon of the Mechaba. Mutalit in mayim al mina l'shachshecha. You're allowed to put water, shriyasa, you're allowed to put water on your leather shoes or your leather belt, but that's it. Aval lechavsoi, dainu shemishavsoi, tzidei zeh al zeh, that's awesome. Then the Mechaba adds, but a beged is much worse, even putting water, shriyasa zeh al kibusa. So if you like to say, we have three dinim. We have regular material that even putting water, shriyasa zeh al kibusai, a hard material like glass, metal, wood, even rubbing is not an issa, and somewhere in between is leather that shriyasa is not kibusai, is muta, rubbing vigorously is asa. That is basically the sugya, and again the havana is because the metzias of the stain does not get into leather like the regular material. Now, so therefore, to put water on a leather glove is fine. Don't rub it. The same is true with a rubber couch, with a leather couch. That is the metzias. So now very good. Now the question is, what about a plastic tablecloth? Again, not this flimsy one. Something that has some density to it, some thickness to it. How would you classify that? So the emes is that in svara, plastic is not beleya. Plastic, the chayra, should be even less than leather. Leather is porous. If you walk in the street and you have a leather shoes and it's raining, so probably the water seeps in. Plastic doesn't seep in. So taka I did see the Arletzia and the Chavdalid Oizvav, and he says that plastic, there shouldn't be a problem of liban at all. There's a beautiful article in the base Aram Yisrael in the Kuntres Kuvdal Ois Amud Nuntes, who the Chayr proves this. However, you'll see a Dava Pella, Gedoylem Ashavipim Onachayim, take a different stance. Rav Moshe in Yeridei Chelik Beis Siman Ayin Vav was asked about this question, about rubbing plastic tablecloth, and basically he says that l'chayra there's no liban because there is no blias, there's nothing absorbed. And he says, but l'maisa, I don't have a raya from any place that's takamutta. I could tell you leather is sort of mutta to put water on it, but I don't have a raya about plastic because there is no plastic in times of Chazal. So Moshe says, so therefore we have to treat it l'chumra like leather. Now that's not Rav Moshe was insecure. Rav Moshe when he had a raya, he set up psak even though no one agreed. But he had no raya. So it's a emunah, maybe it's hanova, maybe it's a little of both, that he says in that shuv, and he repeats it in Chelikei Amud Mem Daled, mapa plastic, havi kamoy or, that only to put water on it is mutter, but l'shav shvay is asa. In other words, maybe you'll say that plastic is less beileya, but do you have a raya to that? The Reb Shlomo Zalman in Shmir Shabbos Tezvav Orach Hafei has the exact same approach. He says l'chayra it is not like leather, but ein lahakol besvara bedava sheyitachen shu bechlal sveika deraisa. Rabbi Yashiv in Chelik Aleph Chavav the Tshuvos, he was asked about lenses, the contact lenses. He says Rabbi Moshe already discussed it, and about plastic, and he quotes the entire tshuva. Rabbi Yashiv Kayidua was very much butler Rabbi Moshe Psak, and the Chutshani also says he has the same approach. In Chelik Beis Amud Reish Ches, we have to be choishes. Maybe it is slightly beleya, we don't know. So to put water on a plastic tablecloth is vadei mutter. To rub it off is also okay. Once the water loosens its grip, to rub it off. But to rub vigorously, like Ramesh's Lashon, to rub it very strongly, that's the problem, and that's the issa. So it's interesting, Taka, that it's not a definitive issa. I saw the Archa Shabbos in two places also says this. So here we have the halacha of plastic, that it's treated like leather. To put water on it's okay. To rub it off is also okay. To rub vigorously, that would be awesome. Now, Lamaisa, the next question is really fascinating, because the truth is that they could make a suit out of plastic, like your tablecloth and like their plastic raincoat. They can make a suit, but it wouldn't wear well, and also you feel funny wearing a sheet of plastic. So again, it's very easy and very cheap. They started making, not now, but a long time ago, they started making polyester threads. Just like there's wool threads, polyester threads. It's the same, it's no big deal. And now you have a suit that's woven, not from wool, polyester. So it looks good, it feels good, but it's not the expensive wool. And again, this is made in suits, in jackets, in bekishes, and everything. Especially Chassidish clothing, bichlal, are much more polyester. It's very practical, it washes well. What do you have to have a wool suit? You can wash well. Bekitza, you could have, again, wool, it's called acrylic and silk. It's silk-like is the terylin. But now the question is, let's talk about a garment that is made up of fibers of 100% polyester. Okay? Now the shaila is, if I have a stain, can I put water on my polyester suit? Do we say that Lamaisa, it's polyester? Polyester is not beileya, so therefore no issa shviyasai. Or maybe we'll say not so fast, because if you have a sheet of plastic, so it's no bliyas because it's one sheet of plastic. But since you have woven the threads, there's plenty of place in between the threads for stain to get in. In fact, when you have dust on your woolen suit, dust doesn't get absorbed into the wool itself. It gets trapped between the fibers. So why can't it be the same with polyester suit? In other words, let me be clear. If you have a blend, say you have a poly wool blend, so if there's no shayla, it's awesome. Because forget about the polyester shaboy, the wool is regular material. I'm talking about 100% a polyester origin. Again, it has different names. Rayon, nylons, makes a chilik. But 100% polyester threads. So the threads themselves are not beileya. But the garment, because it's woven, is beileya. And that's the shayla for today, which is really so negeya. The Shmir Shabbos and Tezvav Zayin feels that there's no shayla. It's mutam. Because since the fabric itself, the polyester thread itself is not beileya, because polyester by nature is not beileya, there's no issa of putting water on your 100% polyester woven suit. In other words, if it's a blend, of course, a problem, or to rub it very vigorously is also, but putting water on your polyester jacket, bekish suit, whatever it is okay. Now, the Oz Nidbru, Chelik Zayin, Lamed Gim, I liked it very much because the Shoyal did his homework. And Imamish explained the Metzias. And then he said, so the Shaila is totally, if the Issa of Shriyas Ekibusay is, the material is Baileya, then it's mutter. But if the Issa is because it's one sheet by leather and plastic, but this polyester suit that's woven should be awesome. And there's Nidbru, Paskins, that it's more Mistabra, that since the material itself is not Beleya, there's no Issa of Shriyasi Zeo Kibus. So that's what he wants to say. But the emes is, it's very hard to accept this, because the Metzias is that there is dirt that gets wedged in between the fibers. As I told you earlier, the dust, that we know dust is a problem. The Gemara speaks about avak, about avak being libun. When you have dust in your garment, it doesn't get embedded in the actual wool. It gets trapped between the fibers. And yet the Gemara says, min avak sha'alav is libun. So obviously, if it's dirty, it's dirty. What's the chiluk if it's parked in the fiber or in between the fabric? What's the difference? The maisa, you are taking out a stain that's taking away the appearance of the beged. And Taka the Megillah Seifa, he has notes on the Shmira Shabbos, says Vav, he's Einei move on. How could it be such a thing? Lamaisa, he feels it's an Issa Deraisa. The polyester jacket is dirty. There's dirt stuck between the threads. Why should that be mutter? There's also a beautiful Sefer Teres HaMalachos Chei Gimel Amud Kuf Lametes at Barichas, who proves that it can't be that it's not libun if it's dirty. And finally, Rabbi Falk in his Sefer says that he feels that this type of material is libun deraisa. So putting water on a polyester jacket or whatever it is that has 100%, that not like me boy, if it's a blend, but even 100% polyester, if it's just one sheet, like they will soon say the raincoats, so there's no blias. But this does have absorption, and that should be treated like regular material. Shriyasai zehu kibusei. Now, Lamaisa, don't forget what Rav Moshe's approach we should certainly take in this case also. We could say asvarahin and asvaraher. But can anybody be 100% certain that putting water on your polyester jacket that's woven will not clean it? Rav Moshe took that to the extent that even on plastic, real plastic, that's one piece, we're going to be choishes. But something like this, that in Svara, it certainly sounds like it's a problem of libun. We definitely have to be machmer. So we have the following, let's review it and apply this to Maisa. The issa of libun is shriyase, merely adding water to material is awesome. Leather is not as absorbent, the only issa is shifsha, but putting water is okay. Plastic, that's one piece we treat like leather. And now this new fact that a woven threads of polyester is treated like regular garment, that there is shriyase zeo kibusei. So Lamaisa, to get back to our plastic tablecloth, again, the one that are reused, a little more of a shayla, that is like regular plastic. Putting water on it is fine. Rubbing off the dirt is fine. Again, it's not exercise of rubbing, but rubbing vigorously, that's shivshuv, that should not be done. If someone does rub his tablecloth, don't give him skila, because some are makel. Some felt that, the Metzias is, I think they say they proved it, that plastic is not beleya. But we follow our Gedolim that said, misafik, stay away, but you can't say it's a chilul Shabbat, that's certain. A crib sheet, which typically used with babies, is basically plastic as opposed to a cloth, simply because the baby soils the crib sheet, you can wash it easily. So a crib sheet is a perfect example of regular plastic that's not woven. The same halach that we mentioned, you're allowed to clean it, don't rub it vigorously. Someone comes to shul, he lives either in the mountains or he lives in a suburban area, and he stepped into this mud, and Bekitza, he has mud on his shoes, or in New York City we step into worse, and the dirt's excrement. Bekitza, your shoes are inappropriate, you can't come to shul with dirty shoes, especially if it's a tzaya on it. So we learned the sugi, it's very simple. You're allowed to, if you find a puddle outside of water, walk into the puddle and wait until the dirt comes off. Because this is regular or, this is kachim, this is vachim tzardalanam at beis, that shriyasai is not kibusai. So loimi boy, when you get to shul and no one's looking, you can take off your shoe and wash it under the sink, perfectly mutter. That's still shriyasai, that's not rubbing forcefully, or putting it into a puddle of water, same thing. But to rubbing it vigorously, if there's ever negeya, that should not be done, because or, we say that shivshuv by or is awesome. So this is a beautiful example. Again, shoes today used to be akaponim, are leather, and the fact that today's shoes are rubber, so it's also our sugya. If you have a rubber sole or a plastic sole, all the same thing. It's zicha mutter to put water on it. The only issue would be to rub it forcefully. We'll soon see that rubber might be a little less of a shaila than plastic. See, plastic is a man-made material that comes from petroleum. Rubber comes the sap of a tree, and that's rubber. We always had them in Paiskim. It's not a new phenomenon like polyester. And some say rubber by nature is less absorbent even than plastic. But definitely a rubber sole is a perfect example. You could put it in water, you could rub off the dirt, not rub vigorously. Now, another good example, a perfect example, you see the contrast. Not long ago, before these raincoats, the plastic raincoats were so popular, a person had a raincoat. That raincoat was also a spring coat. Basically, it was regular material that was supposed to be, I don't know if it was, but it was supposed to be rain repellent. And basically, you went through the rain and you got wet. No doubt, but the coat was wet. So you come home with this raincoat, officially raincoat, that's material, and it's wet. So you want to shake out the raincoat from all the water absorbed in it to get at it shouldn't be so wet. So don't do that. That's the Gemara. The Gemara came out in the Furish. The Mechaber says it in Shin Bei Sif Aleph. Hamana'ir talis chadasha min hatalsha leha is chayiv. Shaking out a beged that has absorbed water within is a malacha derais of Liban. Why? Shaniyur yafala k'may kibus. Now, how is shaking out a beged niyur? It's very poshut. That's the third possibility of kibus. The first is shriyasai, then the shifshup, and what's the third one? Squeezing, schita, getting out the liquid. You don't have to dafka squeeze to get out the liquid. You could shake out the liquid. Just like when your sock falls in the negelvasa, you take it out, the water comes out as dirty. Why is the dirty water? Because the sock was a little bit dirty. The water loosened it, and by taking the water out, you're taking the dirt out. So shaking the coat from its water is shaking the dirt from its coat. So that's klar. Shaking a old-fashioned raincoat that's made of material is malacha of libud, kibus, same thing. More so, and this is halacha in Shin Aleph Sif Mem Hey, to take that raincoat and hang it up on the line or any place where you hang your wet laundry to dry is also asa al smarasayin. Very chamadik halacha, marasayin Chazal were very concerned about. So you only can put it in a place that you don't usually dry clothing, maybe in the closet. I always thought a good idea is on the chair of your dining room, but I saw the Piskei Tshuva says even that's a derech to hang things. It's a chiddush to me. But definitely in the closet you could hang the wet garment. But here the question is, you come in today with your me'il, your shein coat, and you want to shake it off. Perfectly mutter. Because that's not absorbed. The only issue would be if you're mishafshef. Shaking is not mishafshef. More so, you could hang your plastic coat, your real plastic coat, to dry on the line. Because no one washes these clothing, there's no marasayin. So there you see, Mineyu Bay, two halachas, a contrast between a material and a plastic. Rubbers, as I mentioned, rubber material is, it seems by nature, is a little less absorbent. The Shmir Shabbos in Tezvav Chafei, I saw also the Archa Shabbos Shin Pedalit, say you treat it like leather, at least. I mean, you could be maybe more maker, but they consider it like plastic, like plastic and leather. The Shevet HaKosi in Chel Gimel Kuf Ches, he was asked about rubbers, and he says real rubbers that are made from rubber is mutter even to mishafshif. And his feeling is that lamaisa rubber is less absorbent. The whole chumrah that we came is by plastic, but leather by nature is even less absorbent, so less of a chashash. Rubber is less of a chashash, and he feels even be mishafshif it would be mutter. I also saw that in the Kovetz Halachos on Yomtov Sadik Test, he equates plastic with rubber. He says rubber would be a little better, but here's a catch, because he's really makel also in plastic, make it in. So he's saying plastic and rubber, the shitasai, but l'didan, it's probably better to treat even rubber, because some say rubber is like our plastic. Now, slippers, you see, slippers today have different meanings. You could have Crocs, which is a plastic, it's no problem, but many slippers are material, or even part of it. Don't forget, shoes you could put into water, there's no problem, shiraseh kibusay, because it's either leather or plastic or rubber sole. But if your shoe has any natural material, you have laces, or you have a design, especially a nashim shoes, so then as far as the actual material, that's no het, it's not you go basaroiv. So that's why slippers, you have to make sure, it's not a din in footgear, it's a din in all man-made material is okay, but you have to make sure that it shouldn't be from a natural material. Suede is, it sounds scary, so maybe suede will make a heckish suede and polyester, but there's no shaykh. Suede is a natural, regular material, zemesh in modern Hebrew, and by this zemesh, Shmir Shabbos Tezvav Malaf says the regular Hilchos libun apply to suede. No, vinyl is totally different. Vinyl, like vinyl floor, that's a hard plastic. Basically a vinyl you have in cars also, a vinyl is a plastic. And there are some poskim that hold that a very hard plastic, like a tile of a floor, is better than regular plastic, there's no blias at all. And there's really, even by plastic, we think maybe that there's no shaila of absorption, but like our Gedolim told us. But some poskim say that a hard plastic, Tupperware, very popular Tupperware, you put food in it with a cover, it's hard to believe that when you scrub it, something comes out. So plastic that's pliable, like I told you, a tablecloth, and many other plastics that we have to be chayshish that maybe there's a blia. But a hard plastic, vinyl tiles, it doesn't seem you're going to get blias out when you scrub it. So that should be like b'muta, just like really in svara, something that's very hard, there's no blia. Someone asked, the Shabbos discussed this, maybe the fact that a tile is attached to the ground, it loses its shem, it becomes part of the ground. He says, but what does that mean? If this blias, so if you have carpet on the ground, there's an issa of libun by wetting the carpet. So the fact that in Lumdis it's part of the ground has no bearing in our halachos. That is the interesting point here, is that might be a difference between rubber and plastic in its nature. Now, here's another case that is very negayah. In fact, someone asked me yesterday. He has a pacifier, children's pacifiers, and the same is true with the bottle, the nipple of the bottle where the baby sucks from. So the shaila is, can he clean the nipple very well? See, today parents are very concerned, that's what it should be, but transferring germs. So before you give the pacifier fell on the ground, so you clean it very vigorously to make sure that there's no dirt, there's no infection, whatever of possibility. The question is, can you clean very well the pacifier on Shabbos or Yomtov? So this is the question that's better than it seems. See, because the mice of the pacifier, we'll soon see today they're made from silicone, but they were typically made from a plastic or rubber. So if it's plastic and you're rubbing vigorously, so we have the chashash that the poskim say that we're not mishafshek plastic. Now, if it's rubber, so we're a little more calm about the psak. But here's this question, Rabbi Yashiv was asked, and this is quoted in a few places, Bishmai, that indeed you're right, to rub vigorously a pacifier or a nipple should be no different than rubbing leather vigorously, and it's awesome. However, they asked Abshalom Zalman, and I'm happy this is the truth that he wrote, B'Ksav Yad, and Ma'or Shabbos Chelik Aleph Amud Reish Nun Ches, they asked him that Shtifas Moitzes is a pacifier. He says, we see, it should be also to rub it well, but we see Rabbim Shein is arm bezeh. But people do rub it vigorously. What's the heta? So Abshalom Zalman says an interesting aside. He says, you're not rubbing to get out the blias. The blias, whatever's there, doesn't bother you. It fell on the floor, or there's a germ, or someone else used it, So a little bit nervin and a little bit care adds up. You rub it vigorously, but you're not rubbing it to get out the stain that's absorbed within. So like regular cleaning. Now, the Orcha Shabbos, Perikud Gimel Orates, adds something which is very important. He says, really, what Abshalom Zalman probably means to say is that plastic is mutar b'chlal. You want to say, I'm not sure, maybe if you rub it, maybe you will get them. So the chumrah, we accepted the poskim, zachra, don't rub vigorously. But that only works when you're rubbing vigorously to get out the stain. But here you're doing it just to get off the surface. You don't care what's deeply embedded in that pacifier. So that's why that should be a tzad lahakum. Rabbi Nissen Karelitz in quoted in Orcha Shabbos, he says, a new svart, I'm not sure what he means, but he says a moitzetz, a pacifier, is not a beged, it's a keli. And maybe there's no liban by keli. Okay, a new svart. The Or Letzion, Taka, he says that the maise it's rubber, and rubber is no chashash. By this year, the Nishma Shabbos in Chele Gimel Simon Shin Yud Gimel points out something that's true, and the facts are true, obviously, that today's pacifiers are made from silicon. Silicon is absolutely not absorbent. Again, you use silicon to prevent water from seeping through. So he says, if it's silicon, so there's no blias. In other words, there's material, and then there's leather, and there's plastic, and rubber, but silicon is in a class for itself. That's designed and made, and its whole tachas is to keep out any moisture. So how could there be a problem? Bichlal. Okay. The next group of questions brings us to a different part of this shir, but the same idea. And that is using a toothbrush on Shabbos or Yomtov, or they say a plastic sponge or a Shabbos sponge. What's the story about these things? So one thing is for sure that the toothbrush are all synthetic material. It's typically polyester, nylon. Today they have a different material to make it a little less absorbent, but really doesn't make a difference. But they use a vinyl fibers. But basically, these things are a plastic origin. So what's the shaila? So let me tell you. If a person squeezes grapes on Shabbos, chas v'shalom, I say that because it's chil Shabbos deraisa. Schita mishum afarek, taking grapes, making grape juice is malacha deraisa of schita. Why is it schita? Because I'm taking out what's in the fruit itself. Right? So that's the simple case of schita. Now let's talk about someone that wants to wash his face. So he takes a wet washcloth and washes his face. What is that? There's no libun by a human being. You got to wash your face. That's the is of schita. Why is it schita? I didn't make grape juice. Teretz is you didn't use a dry cloth. You used a wet washcloth. Why? You want the water from the washcloth to go on your face and make you clean and more refreshing. So you're squeezing not grape from grape juice. You're squeezing water from being absorbed in a material. That's also schita. Also the same schita, mishum afarik. And many places that hold that baby wipes are also, it's the same thing. You want the water in the wipe to come out to the baby. Now, some are makel, I'm going to get into that now. But the point is that when you have a situation where there's absorption in a beged, to take out the absorption is schita. Okay, good. Now let me ask you another question. When a sack falls into the negavasa, okay, or any other case like that, and you squeeze out the water from the sack, so that's schita. But you're not using the dirty water for sure now. So why is it schita? That's schita mishum malaben. That's the final touches of libun. Yeah. So, but what's the point? The point is that that's like the spin cycle to take out the water. So we have a few categories of schita. The schita taking out the juice, taking out the water in a way that makes it more comfortable, like to wash your face, and then you have schita mishum malabim. Okay. Now I'll ask you a simple question. So, using a regular sponge. Now, sponge is highly absorbent. Why is using a sponge on Shabbos awesome? There's the pashut. Schita. Why? You want the water from the sponge to go onto the table. You don't use a dry cloth. You use a wet cloth. Why? You want it to clean more efficiently. That's why, to make this a little more geschmack, I'll highlight this point. Someone asked me, he had a stain on the table, a small stain, and he had a sponge. Could he wipe up the stain with the water or stain with a dry sponge? A spill. There was a spill of water or soda on the table. So he wants to take a dry sponge and wipe up that spill. So al pi halacha, it's not an issa. That's not schita. It's just the opposite. Schita means you're expelling it. Here you're absorbing it. No, it's bringing it in. Right? So what's the issa of using a sponge? What's in you want to come out. You want the water from the washcloth or from the sponge to go onto the table. Oh. Now the shaila is, if, let's say you have a plastic sponge. What do I mean? So if you never saw it, it's hard to describe it, but it's basically like it looks like strings made of plastic, a little thicker than that, and it's like it's rolled around. So when you use it, you get abrasion, you want to wash a plate, it washes easier. But it's plastic, and presumably there's no real belias. What should be the problem with that? What is that? You can't say an asaf. Why is it asaf? Was it schita? There's nothing absorbed in a plastic, stringy type of sponge. In a sponge, I understand. But what's the issa? Let me make it a little more geschmack. We'll soon see using a steel wool is asa. Why? Because steel wool with water, a steel wool plain is okay. It's not strong enough to machik the plot. But when you put a steel wool in water and then you rub the plate, so it's really very similar to a sponge. You want the abrasion of the steel wool to work with the water that goes on the plate. So why is that awesome? There's a pashut. Poik chazi. Open your eyes. When you have water in a steel wool, the water is in the steel wool itself. When you squeeze it, the water comes out. So it's really, in a certain sense, just a new type of sponge. But a plastic, quote, a plastic sponge, I don't know why they call it a sponge, a plastic brush would be a better word, that there's no blias at all, what should be awesome? Now this very concept is a Beferish Gemara. Come on. The Gemara in Shabbos Kuf Chav Ches, Amid Beis discusses a woman that's having a baby and she needs certain items, so we try to do it with a malacha with a shinoi, we carry with a shinoi. If she needs shemen, oil, so Chavreiseh, her friends, put it in the seir, in the hair, and bring it to a house, and then squeeze it out, and they give her the shemen. Why do you do that? That's a pretty bizarre thing to do. You don't want to carry it, so this is a shinoi in the Haitzah. What are you gaining? When you get to the Yoledes' house, you have to squeeze out the oil. That's schita. And the Gemara ain't schita b'seir. No problem. Rashi explains because seir here by nature is hard, is kosher. Now it's not hard, but it's solid enough. There's no absorption. So this is the Metzias Chazal HaKadoshim told us hair is not beileya. Now, does that mean to say that when you wash your hair, you go to the mikveh, whatever it is, you could squeeze out your beard, your payas, your hair, whatever it is, because it ain't schita b'seir? So it's interesting. There is no Gemara that says anything more than ain't schita b'seir. Al pi din Gemara, there's no schita. Hair is categorically exempt from the issue of schita. But the Rambam in Perek Tes Halachin Aleph ain't schita b'seir. Listen to this. V'hu adin la'or she'ein chayavin al schitasim. So the Rambam is saying two things in his few words. He compares Seyar to Or and Ein Chayovin. Zok the Magid Mishnah, Mi Isura Ika. There's an Issa Rabbanan by Seyar, and that's interesting, his comparison to Or. Or is the Rabbanan, and Seyar is the Rabbanan. What's the Issa, what's wrong? Why is it awesome? The teretz is very poshut. Poik Chazi. Your hair is wet, you come out from the mikveh, your hair is wet. There's water there, right? I thought Seir is not Beleya. Teretz is the Ribuy Sa'arais keep the water within. So the water is trapped between the hairs. And that is definitely Mechzik Keschita, because people don't know this chiluk that Sa'ar is kosher. You tell someone, hair is not Beleya, it's hard, it can't be. My hair is soft. So it's something that's really very much similar to Malacha. So here we have but the Raisa ain't schita b'seya midabanan between the hairs. The Magen Avram in Shin Chav Sifka and Chav Gimel Taka says it's also midabanan, and in Shin Chav Vav Ches he gives an example about dry schita in hair. Mishnah Berurah follows suit in Shin Beis and Hey Shin Chav Vav Chav Hey. So now we see an incredible thing that Taka squeezing hair is an Issa D'Rabbanan, Issa Chama. In fact, the Ma'isra from the Gra Kayudua in Kuf Chav Hey. Asid going to mikvah on Shabbos. He says because the Ma'isa inevitably you're going to make schita. But the minig is not like that. What's the hezba? Because first of all, you don't have to dry necessarily. And Shlomo Zalman has a chiddush in Shmir Shabbos Yudal Ra'ora Samach Gimel Ayin Samach Vav Ayin Sham, that if you squeeze it out, taka water, and the water comes out, it's schita. But if you pat your hair and it goes basically into the towel, straight into the towel, he wants to be makel. But my point that for now is that even if something is not baileya, if there's so much of a riboy of that material and the water is trapped within, that would also be the issa of schita. Oh, now that's the nitzchis v'awatayr. Because when you have even a plastic material, or better, let's talk about steel wool. Steel wool is steel. Steel is absolutely not baileya. So why is there an issa of using a steel wool? And all the poskim agree, because when you put it in water, the water is trapped between the steel wool fibers. So it's a Gemara in Shabbos, actually based on a Gemara in Shabbos, Kufra v'chesem beis. The strands themselves are not baileya, but it's trapped between the strands. So why is steel wool asa? You'll say, ayin, look at the halachos of schita b'seir. So that's why also a toothbrush or any other brush where the fibers are packed one next to the other, and they do contain water. It's trapped between the fibers. That would also be a malacha, the rabbanan al kapanim of schita. Toothbrush or brush are all synthetic material, so they are not baileya in the material itself. True, but like Gara from Seir, that the Gemara says in schita b'seir, and still is an issa the rabbanan. So basically, to apply this again more specifically, let's talk about toothbrush. So again, the bristles are either plastic or whatever it is, makes no difference. Silica makes no difference. There's no bleas in the actual bristles. But lamaisa, between the bristles, sometimes the water is trapped. So when someone wants to brush his teeth, so avada, we don't use toothpaste als mamachek. Avada, if a person is prone to bleed when he brushes, then he shouldn't do it. But those that brush on Shabbos definitely brush during the week. And those that brush during the week never bleed, so it's not a shayla. But anyhow, so basically, we're talking about there's no chashash of bleeding, or of course of mamachek. So what's wrong with using a toothbrush? Teretz says a dry toothbrush, nothing wrong. Unless that makes it bleed, but typically it shouldn't happen. But why do you wet a toothbrush before you use a toothbrush? Because you want it to be more comfortable. So, and then whether you know it or not, you want the water to stay in the bristles, between the bristles, and again, it's very packed together, one next to the other. So you want the water in, and when you brush, you want the water to be extracted. So that's a new form of using a sort of like a sponge on a table. You want the water to come out. In other words, theoretically, I think it could be actuality also, if you take a toothbrush and wet it and shake it out, and there's no water, l'chayra, that there wouldn't be, to use it shouldn't be a problem if there's no water left in the actual brush. Now, what would you gain by doing that? It's not as hard as a dry bristle. I mean, you have to worry about shaking it out as far as chita is concerned. But I'm talking about if you know there's no water in the bristles, then there's no problem. But the problem is that typically you want the water to be there, and the bristles have the ability of retaining it because they're so closely spaced one next to the other. So that's why, although in the bristles ain't schita in bristles, but then ain't schita in seir. And that's why Rav Moshe is the first to discuss it, but in Taka in the Chuvas, Rav Moshe says clearly, in Chelik Aleph Siman Kuf Yud Beis, that he says, interesting Lashon that bothers me a little bit, this toiv, shalei lalachlech b'mayim koydem anikim b'shem schita b'seir. I don't think they had hair brushes in those days on the teeth, but he means to say it's just like the issa schita b'seir. My question is, why is the lashon of toiv shalei lalachlech? Why toiv? If it's an issa d'Rabbanan, why toiv? Maybe he felt that the water will drain out before you use it. But one thing we do see there, and the Bris Olam says the exact lashon, refuah oisamach. I saw the Chutshani and the Minchas Yitzchak the Gimel Memches or Chashabis, Shevet Alevi. Got to say the Levi had it sad lahakol, but he said I can't be mata toothbrush that everybody knows is awesome. That's his psak. But what's interesting is ein ritzayin lahata dav atzmu l'rabim. So I can't be makel. Now lamaisa, I should mention when you learn the sugi, you'll appreciate this. The Shulchan Aruch Shin Chaf Yud Zayin, the Shulchan Aruch says that a svoig that has a handle, you could be makel and use it on Shabbos. A svoig, how could you use it? There's machlokes rishonim, and what the Rabbi Hezber is that even though there is an eventual schita, but since there's a handle, we look at the sponge like a jug of water. You're just taking water out of the jug. You're not squeezing you're not squeezing the actual sponge. You're using a handle. So the Rabbi says you're allowed to use a sponge with a handle, even though inevitably the water is squeezed out, because it's like Meirik Mayim, which is not an issa of schita. So I saw some Paiskim, the Arletzian, primarily in Lamed Hey Vav, he says, why can we use that for a toothbrush? You see, a regular sponge that has no handle is schita. Toothbrush has a handle. Okay, he wants to be makel, but like I said, many places, Machmer, who are Salior of Henkin and Simon Sadik Aleph, also says certain Tanayim, but he's not just makel because of the fact that it has a handle. B'chlal, the Paiskim are not so much saimach on that heta of handle, because as the Rambam shot is, with the handle, it won't be schita. But in this case, it is. So again, the handle, just to mention, I didn't overlook it, but Lamaisa, it doesn't really impact our shaila. Now, people say you're allowed to brush your teeth without water, and doesn't bleed, and no paste, but you have to have a special Shabbos brush. Where'd that come from? So in the Magen Avraham and Shinchav Zayin Aleph says you're a megareres, a scratcher, bag, whatever it is, you scratch yourself with. You're allowed to do it on Shabbos, no malacha, but it should be miuchedes l'Shabbos. And he quotes the Gemara, and he says that the Gemara says, he quotes from the minig, of Besulais, the girls, that they have a special brush they use on Shabbos, miyuched l'Shabbos. Now, what's the miyuched l'Shabbos? I mean, you have to have a special big day Shabbos, you have to have a special big day, a cone of Shabbos. Teretz says it might be a violation of Uvda D'Choyel. Something that's weekday activity, we have to differentiate weekday and Shabbos. So Magen Avraham felt this megareres and a comb is Uvda D'Choyel. Rav Moshe, it says a few words, you could be brush, ba'brush, ha-miyuchad lezeh. I know what miyuchad lezeh means, probably means miyuchad l'Shabbos. The Minchas Yitzchak, kli ha-miyuchad l'Shabbos, Shever Alevi, im efshe miyuchad l'Shabbos, or Letzia, and many others. But doesn't mean you have to have a brush that looks entirely different for Shabbos. The ick is you have a Shabbos brush. You put a piece of tape on it, you write with a marker, Shabbos brush. That should be enough. Now the emphasis, some Paiskim hold that who gives us the right to make our own gezeres. Magen Avraham has a right to. I saw the Arletzian says you don't need a miyuchad l'Shabbos. What for? But at least we understand why people have a special Shabbos brush. It's definitely based on a sugya in Shin Chav Zayin Aleph. Now using the liquid toothpaste they have in there, Yisrael, it's quite common. So put that on the brush, you see clearly the issa of schita. Why do you put liquid toothpaste on the brush? Because you want it to go into your mouth. So to stay in the fibers, onto your mouth. That's a problem. But I think that to put it in your mouth, if you want, and then brush with that, shouldn't be a problem. There's no schita if you put that in your mouth. So you could put I don't know if it's possible, but you could put it in your mouth and you brush like that. That should be okay. Now, after you finish brushing, your Moshe points out, don't rinse the toothbrush because it's a chana. Because you're making a chana. Now, why didn't he say the Issa als Libun? Because, again, you're washing it. Teretz says if it's synthetic bristles, there's no Libun unless you rub it. So it shouldn't be a problem definitely no problem of Libun. Now, Lamaisa, I should mention 2 points, but one really complements the other. There are certain situations that we have to brush. For example, an issue Leil Tefillah was Leil Shabbos and forgot to brush her teeth. So the Paiskim say you must brush your teeth. Now we try to be, some are machmer, some don't do whatever. Fine. But in a case like this, not brushing is a kula. So do it like we described earlier. Also, when Pesach Chal b'Shabbos, you have to try to brush your teeth before you go into the Soiv Zman HaBachila. So again, to be machmer and say I don't brush on Shabbos, maybe in this case be machmer in Hilchos Pesach and do it. So do it right. Now, why do I say that? Because Rav Shlomo Zalman is quoted in Shulchan Shlomo, Chelik Beis Amud Taf Lamed Vav. He wrote this in Askama to the Sridei Eish. He said that Lamaisa, brushing teeth, he says, although I don't know any Issa, but it's midvar ma'mutarim, shenahaga b'em Issa, v'rab me'amireyim, royim by Issa chama ad ma'oid. He puts it all in one. He says, I think there's no shayla, but Erlich Yidin think it's Asa ad ma'oid, so therefore it's that Acher me'hagam Issa, ain't lo hakol. Okay, I don't know if that means a psak or not, but definitely when there is a reason to be makel, avada, we can be makel if you do it properly. Now, this is the point. A dish brush is the same problem like everything else. If the dish brush typically has synthetic material, no schita of it, but using it, when you want the water to be trapped between the fibers, that should be an issa. So when they say they have a special Shabbos brush, and if it has a good hefsha, hopefully, you could assume that it's like widely spaced bristles. There's no trapping. If there's no trapping, there's no problem of what comes out. A steel wool, like I said, I found probably a half a dozen, probably close to a dozen poskim, all agree there's an issa, because the water does get trapped between the fibers. Now, Lamaisa, someone asked a good question. The poskim discussed using, today it's pretty much outdated, but they used to use, when you're washing dishes with cold water on Shabbos, a little irritable, they would use these blue gloves, the rubber gloves, and that would make it easier to wash with cold water. So you're allowed to use that rubbing dishes. Rubber, sama machmir, not to scrub with it. So why is it mutter to use those gloves? That's very poshut. It's asa to clean a plastic or rubber material. But to wash with the rubber material, that's the biggest, making it dirty, not cleaning it. Like, yeah, they made their chlichluch. So rubbing with plastic or rubber is mutter. Rubbing plastic or rubber might be us. So after you finish washing your dish with the rubber gloves, don't wash the rubber gloves. So washing with it is okay, washing it is a problem. So that's basically the Yisoid. The Minchas Yitzchak does discuss these the rubber plastic gloves, and basically says the same Yisoid like I told you. Today they have disposable gloves, disposable plastic gloves, but the halach is basically the same. Pardon me, but it's important to mention washing in a basic kisud at the toilet bowl. So if typically the brushes are, of course, of a synthetic material, but really if you just clean the bowl itself without water, that wouldn't be a problem. It's putting water on it to get off a stain that's on the bowl itself. Many poskim say that if the stain is in the bowl itself, where the water is, you're allowed to use a brush. Why? You're using water to get off that problem. The teretz is that really the water in the bowl is enough to clean it. You don't need the water that's trapped between the fibers in the brush. So it's a situation like Nichelei, Magam Kvayid Abriyas. Lamaisa, many poskim, the Mila Seifa has a beautiful shtickle, Zayin Dalit, and a sort of Orchos Shabbos, and the combination of the fact that there is a problem of Kvayid Abriyas, that would be a tzad het. I'll mention two more shaylas, Tein L'chacham V'yech Gemoy. Washing a sheitel. Whatever happened, the woman got the sheitel dirty. Can you wash a sheitel on Shabbos? Washing a sheitel sounds terrible, right? But let's think. If it's a human from human hair, so that we know that by human hair, there's no issa of libun. You're allowed to wash your beard. Ramosha has an achuva, chelik aleph. If it's synthetic, also no problem. So it makes sense to put it in water. Should be okay. Shuyasa kibusa doesn't apply in Monashach. And Taka, I saw the Piskei Chuvas, Amit Peizayin, who says that, no problem. What I don't understand, he doesn't touch upon it, is if we assume that a sheitel becomes a beged, which Pais can consider that a chalamoid lamashal, so then if it's a beged, and there is dirt, some trap between the hairs, why isn't there a problem of shuyaseo kibusai? Forget about shifshuf. Unless you're going to say it's like dirt above the surface. It's not embedded in the hair itself. Maybe it's like dirt above the surface, but the emphasis is it is stuck between the hairs. Between the hairs is bein ha'sa'aros. So I would think there might be a concern of kibus by putting it into water. But the last shaila, again, is a share for itself, but not to mention it very briefly, at least on Yanenu. If I wear glasses, which I don't, but if I wear glasses and the mom is very dirty, I was dusty after Simchas Torah dancing, and I have to daven the rest of davening. Can I wash the glasses off the dust? Can I rub the glasses? Yes. Why? Because hard glass, like glass to glass, no issa of libun, even scrubbing. Good. Yeah. Then they decided that you don't wear glasses, we got to make money, and you have to look fancy, and so they started making contact lenses, and they first made hard plastic contact lenses. Put in your eyes, and you don't have to wear glasses. So that l'chayr was a good eitzah. You don't have to clean your glasses. Also, the fact that it was a hard plastic, it didn't absorb any germs from the eye, any problems. You don't have to wash it too often. But the problem is, because it's a hard plastic, it wasn't comfortable. It didn't move in the eye so freely. So they started making soft lenses. Now, let me tell you, just soft lenses are extremely hydrophilic, which means it absorbs great amounts of liquid. It's very possible that 70%, 70, not 17, 70% of the lens is liquid that's absorbed in this incredible polymer that's called soft plastic. So it's a great idea, but the problem is that it also takes in all the undesirables. It takes in some of the tears, the lipid, the protein, which is not good for the lens. The lens deteriorates, and if you don't wash your lens every night, it could cause an infection. I know someone that for a year and a half was hard to see because he didn't bother cleaning it, and it gets worse and worse. So if you have these soft lenses, you must clean them, otherwise there's a buildup of germs that could really cause problems to the eye. So now the shaila is, how do you clean it on Shabbos? You don't put it in a dishwasher. You put it into a solution that cleans it. But here's the catch. This is plastic, but it's the most absorbent material that you could imagine. And it's designed that when you put it into this cleansing solution, it cleans right away. So putting it in cleansing solution, if your alarm say this is Zvachim Tzadik Dalet Amud Beis Shuyasi Zeu Kibusai, it's not like plastic, it's not like leather, it's highly absorbent and it does the trick. So many poskim, there's a beautiful article in the Hilchos Shabbos, a few shtiklach, that it's mamish, a new contemporary Shuyasi Zeu Kibusai, even though it's plastic. Why a poskim makel? One svara is pashit, it's not a physical dirt, it's not like a stain. The Avnei Neza in a tshuva in Kufnan Zayin wonders, we poskim say you're not allowed to kasher a pot on Yomtov, even though bishul is mutter, because of a mechzik masakin. Why isn't it us the kasha al libun? You're getting out the blia. So the Avnei Neza, it's not noticeable. There's no stain. There's no libun if there's no stain. A lens is no stain. The oid, some say it's a keli. The issa libun is by a keli. This is not a keli. By begging, I'm sorry. This is a keli. And a keli, there's no libun, so that's why you have two sheets that can talk to you.
Shame irgendwie teilweise die biggest gekregen dat met vertrekken. Gelijk met elkaar zijn als je gesproken de zaak is het zullen veel hebben om te met tussen normaal en nog over te maken. Ziet je ja ik doe ter weerde.
Yeah? You can?
You mustn't.
You must know.
Tiny,
Yeah,
okay. Mach sie die Jungen.
Yeah, basically there's going to be the Sikkim is going to be real and it's not synthetic.
Just first, we said that the metzias of synthetic in any form is basically a plastic. It's a plastic origin. Materials of any sort, natural materials, merely adding water and certainly soaking water is malacha deraisa. Leather is not as absorbent, so putting in water or soaking water is okay. It's just if you rub it vigorously to get out the stain, leather gloves, leather belts. Plastic, according to most poskim, although it's probably not belay, we treat it like leather, the chumrah, and you could add water, you could scrub it mildly but not vigorously. The glass, metal, wood, the poskim are makel, there's no even rubbing is mutter, it's absolutely not absorbent at all. 100% polyester garment that is made of threads is treated like a regular garment because the stain gets between the fibers, and even shviyasi zeu kibusai. Rabbi halacha is pretty similar to to leather, even though some hold it's even better than leather. But basically, shaking out a coat that's wet, winter coat certainly, or even a quote a raincoat that's material, is a malacha of libun. You're shaking out the water with the dirt, and even hanging it up in a place that's mechzik, like they just washed it, is a problem. But on a plastic raincoat, that's one sheet of plastic, there's no bliya and there's no issa of marasayin. If there's dirt on shoes or boots or Crocs, you could wash it off, even rub it off gently, but not vigorously. Anything that has a material to it, leather, laces in shoes, slippers that have material, or suede is definitely a material, and that's a real problem of libun. Vinyl is a fancy name for plastic, as the same halachos. Putting a water onto a poly suit or a tie that's woven is a problem of libun mamish. Cleaning a pacifier or nipple of a bottle, we assume, would be mutter, unless you do it to get out the internal stain, which is typically not done. Schita, pacifier is mutter. Midabanan, only what's strapped between the hairs. I forgot to mention, that's why when you wash your hands, a little bit hair on the hand, there's no problem of schita, because there's not enough hair to put any water trapped within. A sponge should be also mamish just like we said, like regarding steel wool. But a plastic sponge, if you are certain that there's no water trapped between the fibers of the plastic, it should be okay. Toothbrush, the halacha should be it's mutter if you don't bleed. If you have a toothbrush hamiyuchad and you don't use water or toothpaste, the halacha of brushing when it's negeya, l'mashal leil tefillah or erev pesach al b'Shabbos, do it right. Rav Shlomo Zalman felt the minhag is not to brush on Shabbos, so if you have that minhag, definitely keep it. A dish brush that there typically should be a problem of schita. We did say a heta in the basic kisei to use a brush when there's a kvod abris, but it's done right, where you use the water from the bowl itself. And rubber gloves are fine. Washing a sheitel, we said as a tzarchin, someone pointed out that Rabbi Falk, takapask like that the issa of sheitel is because of kibus, and soft lenses, the place was divided if it's a kibus mamish or it's mutter mamish.